For this evening's talk, we will be talking about how to overcome jealousy and anger. So the overview is on, basically I'll be covering on problem-solving technique and how to overcome it. And lastly, we will talk about, answering your questions. Let's try to approach our topic of discussion using problem-solving technique and principles of the Four Noble Truths. The first step is identifying the problem, and for this evening's discussion, we'd like to tackle the second hindrance, which is vyapada, translated from Pali as aversion or ill will. The Buddha proposed the first noble truth as dukkha, to which our general understanding is that suffering is part and parcel of life. The first step is also to acknowledge that any emotion that we feel uneasy about, which disturbs the peace within ourselves, is also considered suffering. Therefore, we shall get into our discussion with identifying the characteristics of jealousy and anger, which I would like some input from you later. Once we have a clearer idea of what jealousy and anger are, we talk about some of its causes, which is the second noble truth. In the third noble truth, the Buddha says there is a solution to the dukkha. And here, the second step to problem solving is to generate solutions to solving the issue. The third step is to choose which among the ideas generated might be suited to our needs or circumstances. And in the fourth step, putting it into action and reviewing its outcome. So in generating ideas and making choices, we could use some principles from the Eightfold Path as well. I'd like to start off our discussion with the Noble Eightfold Path, although I did mention earlier that some aspects of the Eightfold Path are used in step 3. The first path is Samadhi, which is translated as right understanding. In order to approach a concern or an issue, we need to first understand it. And this also means knowing our perceptions of the subject matter. With a clearer understanding, we would then be moved towards cultivating Sammasankappa, right thought, which will guide and shape appropriate speech and action. With these gears in motion, the next course is naturally sustaining a healthy life through right livelihood. While the remaining parts, Samavayam, Samasati, and Samasamadhi, are much more emphasized upon in the cultivation of the mind towards liberation, we could still adopt the values of exercising the right effort, practicing mindfulness principles, and keeping our mind focused and concentrated on the goal in mind, which is overcoming vyapada. The first step in problem-solving technique is defining the problem. What defines jealousy? Many people use the words jealousy and envy interchangeably. There is a difference between them. Let's first talk about envy. Envy is wanting what someone else has. Mr. Jones round the block has the latest BMW, or Mrs. Jones got the promotion and you want the same. Resentment towards the Joneses might arise for attaining something you want but have yet to achieve. That is envy. I'm envious of the Joneses. Jealousy is typically thought of in terms of relationships, and envy is more associated with desiring what someone else has or has achieved. So what are the signs of envy and jealousy? We feel distressed when others get what we want, feel a strong desire for something another person has, and a feeling of discontent and resentment. When a person downplays another person's success, it would be described as envy. Now let's look at how jealousy is like if someone who is jealous of you. He or she might find ways to copy you, give insincere compliments, or talks negatively behind your back. They might say things to minimize your accomplishments, either directly or indirectly, in a passive-aggressive way. They might gloat when you make a mistake. They will be the first to say, I told you so. A jealous person will start a rivalry because of the desire to be better. They start negative rumors as they want others to see you in a negative light. Finding fault in everything you do. They dislike you for no reason. They don't know you, but will detest you anyway. I hear many of such stories in the corporate setting among my clients. Yeah. Now, here we have the Dhammapada verses 365 and 366 on envy. The Buddha advised the setbacks of having envy. And from this, we can infer that any kind of inner peace that we are striving to achieve would be hindered when we have yet to work through envy and jealousy. Another strong feeling categorized under Vyapada, aversion, ill will, is anger. Let's spend some time discussing anger. What words come to mind when we want to explain what it is? So I understand you can't switch on your mic, so please feel free to type in the chat line how you want to describe what anger is to you. You can also describe physical sensations associated with anger. Loss of control, yes. Feeling hot, yes. Shallow breathing, yeah. Shallow breathing, yes. Rapid breathing is also, yes. Unpleasant feeling, yeah. Unpleasant feeling is rather vague. Yeah, we don't feel good about it, so it's unpleasant. Maybe we want to be much more specific about that feeling. Yeah, frustration, agitation, tension, feeling emotional about it, feeling uncomfortable. The head is pounding and shouting. Right, good. Disappointed, yeah. Shouting and using harsh words, not following instructions. Yes, rage, outbursts of emotion, can't control, trembling, can't sleep well, yeah. Yeah, being violent, feeling irritable. Hey, you guys are so good, you know, because I think you probably cover my next slide. Yeah, heart pounding. Okay, hang in there. Cannot reason, yeah, all right. Thank you. Let me move on. Otherwise, I can't cover the next slide. Yes, narrow vision and view. That's correct too. Okay. All right, thank you for your participation. Now let's ponder upon how anger might have developed, right? So anyone would like to chip in? Actually, some of you have already given the answers, right? The first stage could possibly be a feeling which starts with the letter D. Feeling disappointed, yes. Disappointment might most likely be the start of before it leads to anger. Disappointment arises when we don't get what we want. But we also have to remember that we experience disappointment when we get what we don't want. Yeah, we more often we, focus on what we don't get what we want. But sometimes we get what we don't want. Yeah. So from disappointment builds up. What might be the next stage? Anyone? Starts with an I. Yes. Feeling irritated, irritability, feeling annoyed. Good. What else? The next one. And then it builds up. And then we start, and then the next stage possibly could be a feeling which starts with the letter F. Frustration. Yes. Frustration builds up and it gets bigger, and that's when it leads to anger. Now from anger, we don't manage it, we don't take care of it, it's going to be boiling here, and it might give rise to a more intense feeling. Yes, that's rage. And what might be L? Anyone? Anyone can guess what L might be? It's another word to describe an intense feeling of anger. Not lost control. It's only a 5-letter word. Lashing out is 2 words. Livid, yes. Thank you, Lim. Livid. All right, from livid, still not well managed. What might it boil over and become, what might be W? Wrath. Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. Wrath. Yes. Okay, let's move on. So we have what are the possible stages of anger. Anger could also have manifested due to these feelings or a combination of them, right? Fear, insecurity, shame, hurt, guilt, sadness, and anxiety. Let's unveil the mask of anger through a discussion on the common types of anger. Passive anger, also known as implored anger, the type that doesn't express itself as anger. It seeps out in little ways, such as sarcastic comments or acts of unconscious aggression against the person you're mad at. Yeah, for example, maybe forgetting to fill up the car with fuel when you know your spouse won't have enough to make it to work the next morning. Yeah. Passive anger can also be directed internally. This is especially true if you have repressed your anger so much you don't even know you're angry. You may find yourself stress eating, having panic attacks, drinking or excessive shopping, behaving erratically or self-harming. The next one, volatile anger. This type of anger is on the opposite end of the spectrum from passive anger. With volatile anger, you know you are mad, and so does everyone else. Another name for volatile anger is explosive anger. It is often unpredictable, can easily spiral out of control, leading to words and actions that you immediately regret once the storm has passed. Fear-based anger, right? Sometimes it is easier to be angry than to be scared. That's especially true when we are fearing for the safety of a loved one. After all, no one can hurt us more than the people closest to us. So when we see them behaving in ways that could harm them in some way, we may react with anger rather than show our fear. Besides, anger often gets results, at least temporarily. Consciously or unconsciously, we may vent our anger on our loved ones in the hope of shocking them out of the behaviors that we fear. In the long run, however, showing anger when what we are really feeling is fear is not constructive. Angry outbursts only lead to hurt, fear, and resentment in those we love. Hardly the best way to protect them from the things we fear for them. Next, we have frustration-based anger. When frustration-based anger is directed against a loved one, it's a lot like fear-based anger. We have the highest expectations and greatest hopes for those we love most. When we see them failing to live up to what we think is their highest potential, we get frustrated. And that frustration can all too often boil over into anger. This type of anger can also be inwardly directed. Maybe we're disappointed with life. Maybe we feel that others have the things we don't. We watch as others seem to thrive and prosper while we struggle from one disappointment to the next. This kind of anger is based, above all, in the comparison of how life is or seems with some grand ideal of how you think life should be. The fact is, though, whether your dream is for yourself or for your loved ones, real life can never live up to the fantasy. We have pain-based anger. Often this type of anger that masks hurt, pain, or even clinical depression. Just like fear, pain and sadness are among the most difficult feelings to deal with. For some people, anger is easier because, if only for a moment, anger can make us feel powerful, whereas sadness and depression can make us feel weak and vulnerable. When pain threatens to overwhelm us in sadness, then sometimes anger can feel like the only weapon to fight with. But in fact, it will only make matters worse. Not only does this anger type fail to address the underlying pain, it also just adds more pain, the pain of regret, of loneliness, of guilt. Next, we have chronic anger. When in anger, we would have a rush of adrenaline, and at that moment, we feel powerful, dominant. And anger makes an impact. We can see how people around us change their behaviors to accommodate us, most likely to prevent another outburst, in a way that feels bad. We don't want our loved ones in particular to feel afraid. But there's another side that maybe we don't like to admit. And that side likes the anger and the effect it has on others. That hormonal rush can feel great, and to be sure there is a sense of power in watching others being submissive. But chronic anger, remember, is an addiction, and without help, not only will it wreak havoc on the physical and mental health, but it will also destroy relationships. Manipulative anger can be a lot like chronic anger. It is used as conscious or unconscious tool for controlling others. Like volatile anger, manipulative anger is often loud and explosive. The goal is to shock those around you into compliance. In the long run, though, people won't stick around much when they have had enough. Moving on, when we are stressed and tired, anxious, and some days we feel like we are barely keeping our head above water. This is when we are most vulnerable to overwhelmed anger. This is the kind of anger that happens when life just gets to be too much. Often it's the result of not taking proper care of ourselves, or failing to get enough sleep, eat nutritiously, exercise, or de-stress. And quite a number of cases that I've been seeing since the pandemic, it's very much this overwhelmed anger. People tell me they don't understand why they should be angry. They're not in the traffic rush, but it also because it's just too much that it's become unbearable. Okay, next, moving on. Anger isn't only a psychological state. It can also often a physical basis. For example, low blood sugar is usually the cause of the new buzzword hangry, as in hungry, angry. Imbalances in brain chemical or hormones, for instance, can easily give rise to anger, as can other illnesses. So if you find yourself getting angry for no apparent reason, well, it's not a bad idea to make an appointment with your doctor. Last but not least, righteous anger. This is the kind of anger that is constructive, the kind that spurs you to action, righting a wrong, defending the innocent and the helpless. This is the kind of anger that makes the world a better place. So envy and jealousy could be observed from facial expressions, body language, and through unwholesome speech, as discussed earlier. Anger can be manifested in the physical body, which are felt as physical sensations. Do you recognize some of these sensations? Headaches, fatigue, pressure in the head, pressure in the sinus cavities, heart palpitations, tightening of the chest, increased blood pressure, tingling, numbness. Well, the Dhamma part of verse 221 on anger. As humans, anger is part and parcel of our life. We are reminded once again to work through our anger to reduce our dukkha. We have finished defining what envy, jealousy, and anger are. And before we move to the second step of generating solutions, it's important to understand what might be the underlying causes of these difficult feelings. I'm certain by now you would agree that when a person is envious or jealous, he or she is essentially seeking some form of recognition for his or her existence. And behind the envy or jealousy is the self-perception of not being enough, inferior compared to another. Now, causal factors of anger, as you can see from this diagram, are unmet needs, dissatisfactions, obstacles to goals. Now, before we move on to the discussion on the how-tos, I'd like to talk about two ideas proposed by Henry Murray and Eric Berne on human motives and psychological needs. Murray, a psychologist, suggested that for psychological well-being, humans have needs for achievement, nurturing, and independence. In other words, he said, We are mostly driven to seek acknowledgement through our achievements and a sense of belonging. Yeah, that's what he means by affiliation, and a sense of inner power, being able to have things within our control. Byrne, the psychiatrist, also proposed a few psychological hungers that motivate a great deal of our behaviors. Here, I will only mention 3. Recognition, which is similar to Murray's achievement needs. The need for stimulation, mental stimulation in particular, and the need for structure in order to avoid the pain of boredom, the need for security, and to be in charge of one's life. Now take a moment to consider the reason I'm discussing Murray and Byrne. Remember, we talked about possible underlying causes of envy, jealousy, and anger. So one possible way to working through these difficult feelings is meeting unmet needs. And from these theories, it gives us some form of idea what might be some of our unmet needs. I'm more than halfway through this topic, and yet I'm still talking about theories. So bear with me for this last bit. The CBT model, the cognitive behavioral therapy model, the gold standard for working towards psychological well-being, is pretty much in line with Buddhist psychology. Now, when you look at the red circle here, our thoughts create feelings, and feelings in turn create behaviors. Consequently, behaviors reinforce thoughts. So here we have the feelings of envy, jealousy, and anger to work through. We've got to consider what thoughts or perceptions that have given rise to those feelings, right? We want to change the feelings. If we want to work it backwards to change feelings, we got to change the way we think. Okay, now let's talk about the process on how to overcome envy, jealousy. The first step to change is to have the awareness that the feelings of envy, jealousy exist. Some of us might be aware. Maybe we've been told by others that we're feeling envy and jealous, right? The next step is coming to terms with it and accepting that we have envy or jealousy. For a long time, very much of our conditioning is to associate the feelings of envy, jealousy as being very bad. It's not good for us. We're a bad person if we have envy, we have jealousy. So much so that it's hard for people to accept the fact that they're feeling jealous or they're feeling envious. The next step is coming to terms with it and accepting that we have envy, jealousy. If we're not aware or in denial, how can we be motivated to make changes? In the third step of this process, we need to have self-reflection to look deeper into the issue. Is the main cause lack of recognition or acknowledgement, or lack of ability? Once we have established the cause, generating solutions will be much more targeted. If it's lack of ability, we find ways on how we can improve ourselves. With 1 or 2 ideas, we can try to work on it and review its results. If it doesn't work out, try another way. Working through anger is a similar process. We need to be aware or recognize what needs that are not met, which are what we call the trigger factors. Yeah. Following that, we have to own it and accept the fact that we are angry. Once we have identified the unmet needs, we prioritize 1 or 2 most urgent and important ones to address. Remember, we talk about Murray's needs for acknowledgement, recognition, affiliation, that's the sense of belonging, and inner power. So the following step is naturally looking at ways on how to get those needs met. I know the process sounds simple and basic. The challenge really is in the identification of unmet needs. Well, in a nutshell, here are some ways that we could use to work on these feelings. Identifying triggers, which in other words, identifying unmet needs. Yeah. We could take some time to exercise, because during exercise, the brain stimulates the release of endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, which what we call feel-good chemicals. And when we feel better, we are less likely to be overreactive. We could talk to somebody, a trusted friend, because by talking to someone, very often the cognitive and emotional processing of the situation is activated. Yeah, the thoughts in the mind are not just going round in a loop. And usually after talking to somebody, it might appear that some things just got sorted out and we could make much more sense of the situation. And subsequently, solutions can be generated. Or when talking to someone is not possible, you could try journaling. Yeah, journaling is a way of penning down your thoughts because the thoughts are intangible. They're hovering in the back of our head, right? So when you pen it down, or if some people might prefer to type, but if you pen it down, the thoughts get concretized. They're no longer in that intangible form. And when you do that often enough, I can assure you, some things will shift. You will find within yourself, your inner wisdom, insight will come up. Yeah. Another helpful way is stepping away from the situation temporarily. It's not running away or escaping, but taking one step back. When we are calmer, we will be able to reflect better and again, not be overreactive. One way to help us feel calmer is breathing exercises or the progressive muscle relaxation technique. Dr. Pangchenka has done some wonderful work in creating video tutorials for this. And you can also find plenty helpful resources on the net. Last but not least for our discussion this evening is to change our mindset, reframing our thinking, our perception, which I had briefly talked about earlier in the CBT model. If we want to change the feeling, we would have to change the way we think. Right. When we feel overwhelmed, right, when the going gets tough, it might also be helpful to have daily reflections on what things are going right for us. Practicing gratitude will lead us to be less envious or jealous. When we focus on even the smallest blessings, we can be reassured and inspired to work towards untangling those tough knots in our life. Another helpful reminder is to practice self-compassion. I'm certain you will learn more about this from Sister Lau Mien. I like to briefly mention this because I find it as necessary as eating to survive on a day-to-day. Self-compassion basically involves recognizing when we are stressed or struggling without being judgmental or overreacting. Now, how do we prevent overreaction or being judgmental? Mindfulness is the key. Use your breath. When we start to notice or focus on how we're breathing, if we focus or we start to bring our mind to the way we're breathing at that point, if it's a rapid, shallow breathing, we pay attention to, oh, it's rapid, shallow breathing, right? Or we're having a regular breathing. Usually when we are in an anxious state, it's never going to be a calm, regular kind of breathing pattern. It's usually the shallow, rapid breathing. So the moment we pay attention to that kind of breathing, we actually, in a way, have distracted our mind from over-focusing on what might be what might be stressing us, that when we say the anxious state. So being in the present moment is to just focus on the breath. Okay, the other thing is self-kindness, being supportive and understanding towards ourselves when we are having a hard time. We can be kind and we're kinder to others. We're kinder to our best friends. We are kinder to our pets when they're having a hard time. We very much often forget to be kinder to ourselves when we are having a hard time. And when we are having a hard time, recognize that we're having a hard time. Maybe we might say this: I am going through a hard time right now. Take a few deep breaths. Just focus on the deep breathing. Maybe 3 deep breaths. Yeah. And then the next line that we could say to ourselves, the next statement, this soon shall pass, because we know nothing stays permanent. All right. The third component to self-compassion is connectedness. remembering that everyone makes mistakes and experiences difficulties, and that we are not alone. Okay, now we've come to the last bit of our discussion. I'd like us to also consider that while anger could block our attention and ability to perform, it could fuel and motivate us, sharpen our attention, and serve as a reminder of what's important. Fear could trigger memories of past failures, rob our attention and focus, and undermine our performance. Or it could make us more careful about our decisions, deepen our reflection, and create opportunities for changing direction. What about sadness? Sadness could flatten out our mood and demotivate us, or it could help us reprioritize and motivate us to change our environment, circumstances, and behavior. Worry could make us procrastinate and get in the way of accomplishing goals, or it could help us fine-tune our plans, adjust our expectations, and become more realistic and goal-oriented. Frustration could hinder our progress, or it could challenge us to do more or better. Anger is a normal human emotion, and we all experience it at some point in our life. Remember, when it is controlled and managed, it can be a source of good for ourselves, our loved ones, our community, and our world.